They found his teeth before they found his name. Moonlight spilled cold silver across the frozen river, reflecting the broken fragments of a man's final moments. The water's surface, cracked and blood-stained, held the chilling secrets of a brutal murder, one that screamed revenge and whispered betrayal. The detective crouched by the shore, her breath visible in the freezing air as she examined the shattered jawbone and missing teeth scattered on the ice. Nearby, a battered leather wallet floated, soaked and worn, the edges curling as if clinging to a fading past. Inside, a faded photo of a boy smiling beside his father told a story now drowned in blood. A phone's shrill ring shattered the silence. A piercing scream echoed through the city. It was the sister's desperate cry. The Westies had made the Cosa Nostra bleed, and the streets were silent witnesses to a war reignited. The night was heavy with threat, and nothing would ever be the same again. She picked up the phone. It was her brother's scream, raw, desperate, and broken. Maria's world shattered in that instant, a piercing scream tearing through the fragile veneer of the city's night. The Westies' once mighty hold on the streets had crumbled into whispered legends and old scars, but now the past clawed back with vengeance. The crumbling tenements and graffiti-stained walls that bore witness to decades of bloodshed seemed to close in tighter. Tommy West, the lion of the Westies, was gone. His empire fractured like a shattered mirror, his family ripped apart by violence and betrayal. Maria's voice trembled as she whispered, "They don't just want him dead, they want us erased." The shadows lengthened, the war rekindled beneath a cold, unforgiving sky. The city knew only one truth. This was the beginning of a blood feud that would scar generations. Before the fall, Tommy West was a titan carved from loyalty and violence. The streets had molded him, each fist fight, each whispered deal a testament to survival. His family was his code, the only thing he trusted beyond the iron laws of the underworld. He remembered smoky backrooms where alliances were forged over cheap whiskey and cigarette smoke, faces of men who swore loyalty with blood and grit. Yet beneath the hardened exterior, there was a man haunted by the ghosts of choices past. "You can't fight ghosts," he muttered one night, voice raw, "especially the ones born from your own blood." His empire was more than crime. It was a fragile thread holding together a family fractured by secrets and lies. The Westies were forged in fire and blood, not just muscle but brotherhood. Every scar told a story, every loss a silent vow of vengeance. Tommy's closest allies were brothers bound not by blood but by loyalty hardened through betrayal and shared hardship. But as the police tightened their grip and the Cosa Nostra pressed their assault, shadows crept into the Brotherhood's walls. Deals dissolved, trust eroded, and fear grew like a cancer. Tommy's voice echoed through the emptiness of an abandoned warehouse, cold and resolute. "We fight not for power alone, we fight for survival." But survival meant sacrifice, and the first cuts came not from the enemy but from within. The first blood spilled on a storm-lashed night, thunder echoing like a herald of war. Tommy stood alone on a rain-slicked street, rain soaking his leather coat, gun heavy in his hand. His brother's screams echoed in his mind as lightning tore the sky apart. "This is no longer about honor," Tommy whispered, voice raw with pain and rage. A single bullet shattered the silence, sparking a war that would rip families apart and drown the streets in new blood. The Westies had made the Cosa Nostra bleed, and there was no turning back from the inferno unleashed. The city's heart beat faster, and the night swallowed the first cries of vengeance. Maria West wasn't just the sister of a fallen soldier. She was the fragile core holding together a family torn by violence and silence. Raised amid secrets whispered behind closed doors and the constant threat of betrayal, Maria's innocence had long since been stolen by the streets. Yet beneath her grief and fear burned a fierce fire. When the news of Tommy's death reached her, it tore through her like a bullet. "He was more than a soldier," she whispered, voice trembling. "He was my family, my last hope." The city's shadows closed in as she clutched the phone, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. The streets had taken so much, but they hadn't taken her fight. Maria was no longer just a sister mourning loss. She was a force rising from the ashes, ready to reclaim her shattered world. Tommy West's life was a brutal tug-of-war between loyalty and survival. He bore the weight of two worlds, the unforgiving streets and the fragile family that grounded him. His memories flickered between moments of joy and violence, laughter at family dinners shattered by the distant echo of gunshots, whispered promises made under dim street lamps. Each choice was a sacrifice, each secret a chain around his soul. Frankie, his closest friend and brother-in-arms, once said, "You carry the past like a ghost on your back." Tommy knew the truth of those words all too well. The ghosts of his decisions haunted every shadow, and survival was a bitter victory at the cost of everything he loved. Loyalty was the lifeblood of the Westies, but even the strongest bonds could unravel. Frankie felt the fracture before anyone else. The subtle glances, the hushed phone calls, the growing silence between brothers. When the cops started knocking and the money disappeared, "I knew everything was changing," he confessed bitterly. Trust, once ironclad, now cracked under pressure. He paced his small apartment, the walls plastered with photos and newspaper clippings chronicling a world falling apart. The war wasn't just outside, it was tearing them from within. Frankie's heart ached with the realization that survival meant choosing who to trust and who to betray. The price of loyalty was more than blood, it was betrayal. Detective Marla Diaz was relentless, a force of justice cutting through the city's darkest corners. To her, the Westies were more than criminals, they were a puzzle she was determined to solve. Each phone call, each whispered deal, was another piece in the chaotic mosaic of crime. "This isn't just about locking them up," she told her partner. "It's about breaking their code of silence." The case consumed her, blurring the lines between law and vengeance. As she traced the shattered lives and fractured loyalties, she knew the war was far from over. The city held its breath while she closed in on the truth, even as the darkness threatened to consume her too. Rachel's disappearance was more than a mystery. It was a wound that bled through the Westies' fractured family. Tommy's fiancée vanished the night the first bullet was fired, leaving behind a void no one could fill. Whispers filled the streets. Was she a victim, a traitor, or something more? "She was the only light he had left," Tommy's brother murmured, voice heavy with sorrow. The silence Rachel left behind screamed louder than any gunshot, and every shadow seemed to hide a secret. Her absence wasn't random. It was a calculated move in a deadly game. As the city held its breath, Rachel became a symbol of everything lost and the steep price of war. The money was gone. The loyalty was gone. Now, all Tommy had was the gun. Once a fortress of power, his empire crumbled beneath the crushing weight of betrayal and greed. The deals that once held like steel chains snapped overnight, leaving shattered alliances and open wounds. Frankie's voice trembled with frustration as he confronted a man he once called brother. "You sold us out for a paycheck." But the fracture wasn't limited to within their ranks. The Cosa Nostra smelled weakness and moved swiftly to crush what remained. Tommy's world spun out of control as enemies multiplied, friends vanished, and the harsh reality set in. Survival demanded blood, and the streets wouldn't give quarter. The cops closed in faster than ever before. Detective Diaz followed a trail of destruction and broken codes, each arrest tightening the noose around the Westies. But the syndicate adapted quickly, slipping through cracks like smoke. Tommy's name echoed in interrogation rooms and whispered conversations, a ghost haunting those who feared the fall. "We're watching you," Diaz warned her team, "and we're ready to end this." But even as law enforcement moved like hunters, the Westies fought with the desperation of cornered beasts. The city became a battleground where every step could be a trap, and only the ruthless survived. The war was no longer in the shadows. It had exploded into brutal daylight. Inside the crumbling crew, fractures deepened like cracks in concrete. Frankie wrestled with a painful question: was loyalty worth the price of death? Money vanished, and with it, the fragile trust that had once held them together. He stood in his cramped apartment, surrounded by newspaper clippings and frantic notes plastered on walls, muttering, "This isn't the life we chose, but it's the one we have to fight for." Friends, brothers in arms, lovers, each slipping away into suspicion and fear. The war was no longer external, it tore through their own ranks. Frankie's next move would decide salvation or total ruin, the thin line between survival and destruction. Rachel was no ghost. She was a weapon in this deadly game. Her disappearance tore through Tommy's resolve like a blade. Maria's voice cracked with desperation. If she's gone, then so is everything he's fighting for. The crew unraveled as the Cosa Nostra struck with brutal precision, lighting fires that spread unchecked. Streets burned with chaos and fury, and with each flare, the Westies' grip slipped further into darkness. In this hell, survival demanded ruthless sacrifice. No one was safe, and no loyalty was sacred. The war's flames engulfed friend and foe alike, and the night whispered that everything was lost or about to be. Tommy faced his darkest hour alone. On a rain-soaked rooftop, city lights flickering below like dying stars, he whispered, "This war isn't over." His hands trembled but didn't release the gun. Each scar on his soul screamed for vengeance. The streets that raised him now threatened to consume him whole. Years of betrayal, loss, and bloodshed converged in this final moment of choice: to burn it all down or be buried beneath the ashes. Thunder rolled overhead as he stepped back into the shadows, ready to unleash hell upon the world that had betrayed him. This night was his reckoning. The son who was a snitch. It was a truth no one wanted to face, but the betrayal ran deeper than anyone dared imagine. Frankie's phone buzzed in the dead of night, a coded message revealing the ultimate treachery. His brother, once his closest ally, had been feeding information to the Cosa Nostra all along. "He wasn't after money," Frankie whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. "He was after me." The family was torn, not just by enemies outside, but by the poison growing within. Trust shattered into dust, and the walls closed in tighter. In this deadly game, the knife behind the back was closer than the gun in his hand. The wife who made the call, another twist that fractured the fragile alliances. Maria's voice trembled as she confronted her husband. "How long were you playing both sides?" The revelation burned hotter than any bullet. Deception was no longer an enemy outside. It was the poison inside their bloodline. Tommy's closest confidante was the architect of their downfall, manipulating loyalties like chess pieces. The city's cold streets echoed with whispers of betrayal, and every secret exposed cut deeper. As the house of cards collapsed, the Westies were left exposed, vulnerable to the ruthless forces closing in. "He wasn't after money, he was after me." The words haunted Frankie's mind as he pieced together the web of lies. It wasn't just a power grab, it was personal vengeance disguised as business. The Cosa Nostra's reach stretched beyond the streets, into the hearts of those he once called brothers. Every meeting now carried a knife's edge, every smile, a mask hiding betrayal. Frankie's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like the twisting fate that ensnared them all. The game had changed, and the rules no longer mattered. Survival meant exposing the devil within before he destroyed everything. The betrayal hit hardest when it came from the inside. The crew's strongest bonds shattered in moments of rage and fear. Tommy confronted his closest allies, voices raised in desperate accusations. "You were family," he growled, eyes blazing, "but you chose the knife over loyalty." The streets, once a brotherhood, had become a battlefield of suspicion. Every handshake was a gamble, every ally a potential enemy. The Cosa Nostra exploited every fracture, their smile cold and merciless as they watched the Westies bleed from within. The fight wasn't just for survival. It was for the soul of the streets. As the dust settled on the latest betrayal, Tommy stood alone in the ruins of his world. The final truth settled like cold ash. There was no trust left to save, no family left to protect. He walked into the funeral wearing the same suit he killed his father in. A voice whispered in the dark. The bloodline's reckoning was coming, brutal and inescapable. Every scar, every loss, every lie had led to this moment of reckoning. Tommy's heart hardened as he prepared to burn it all down or be buried beneath the ashes. The war was far from over. It was only beginning anew. One final betrayal, one last shot fired. Tommy stood beneath flickering streetlights, the cold night air heavy with the scent of rain and gunpowder. His heart thundered as memories of blood spilled and promises broken flashed before his eyes. "This ends tonight," he murmured, voice low but fierce. Every betrayal, every loss, every scar demanded reckoning. His hand tightened on the pistol, the weight of years of pain channeled into this moment. The streets held their breath. Would he burn everything down or become the ashes himself? The final act had begun. The funeral was no sanctuary. It was a battlefield cloaked in sorrow. Tommy walked in wearing the same suit he killed his father in, a ghost of the past and a harbinger of vengeance. Family and foes gathered beneath a sky darkened by grief and betrayal, eyes locked in silent accusation. Every whisper carried the weight of shattered loyalty. Tommy's gaze pierced through the crowd, unflinching and cold. "You all thought this was over," he said, voice cutting through the silence. "But this is where the bloodline ends. Or it begins again." The air was electric, every heartbeat a countdown to chaos. The shot rang out like thunder, echoing through the cold streets. Chaos erupted as gunfire shattered the fragile calm. Men dove for cover, curses and screams mixing in the night air. Tommy moved with purpose, every step a declaration of war. "You wanted blood? You'll get it," he growled. The war that had simmered in shadows now boiled over in flames and fury. Every bullet fired was a piece of his soul unleashed. Every enemy felt a step closer to redemption or ruin. The night had become a battlefield, and only the ruthless would survive. Amidst the carnage, Maria found herself face to face with the ghost of her past, the man who had shattered her family. Her voice was steady but cold. "You took everything from us." The enemy's eyes flickered with a mixture of regret and defiance. There was no redemption here, only the crushing weight of choices made and lives lost. As gunfire faded into echoes, Maria's resolve hardened. The war wasn't just about blood. It was about reclaiming what was stolen. Her eyes burned with a fire that would not be extinguished, a promise that this story would not end in silence. As dawn broke over the shattered city, Tommy stood amidst the ruins of his world, bloodied but unbroken. The war had carved scars deep into his soul, but he was still breathing, still fighting. "This is our reckoning," he whispered, voice raw with pain and resolve. The Westies had bled, the Cosa Nostra had bled, and now the city itself bore the marks of their war. The past was a shadow that would never fully fade, but Tommy was ready to face whatever came next. The bloodline story was far from over. It was a brutal legacy written in fire and steel. The war had ended, but the silence that followed was deafening. Tommy sat alone in a dimly lit room, the city's distant hum, a cruel reminder of everything lost. "There's no retirement plan for ghosts," he whispered to the empty air. The streets had taken his family, his brothers, his past. What remained was a hollow victory, the price of survival steep and unforgiving. He traced the scars on his hands, each one a testament to battles fought in shadows. The Westies were broken, but not forgotten. And though the city slept, the ghosts of blood and betrayal would never rest. Maria walked the empty streets that had once been her battlefield, her footsteps echoing in the cold night. The war had changed her, carved a new identity from pain and loss. "We got what we wanted," she murmured, "but at what cost?" The city no longer felt like home, but a graveyard of memories. Her gaze hardened with resolve. Silence was no longer an option. The price of silence was too high, and the only way forward was through the shattered pieces of the past. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a force ready to rewrite the rules. Detective Diaz closed the case file with a finality that felt both victory and loss. Justice had been served, but the wounds ran deep, too deep for the city to heal quickly. "They're ghosts now," she said quietly to her partner. "Ghosts will never forget." The faces of the fallen haunted her dreams, reminders that law could only do so much. The streets remained a battlefield of silence and shadows, but at least the nightmare had an end. As she stepped outside into the dawn, she knew the city would never truly be safe, but neither would she ever stop fighting. Frankie stood at the edge of the city, watching as the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon. The war had hollowed him out, leaving scars that no gunshot could explain. "We fought a war no one wanted to admit," he murmured. "And now we live with the silence." The loyalty that once defined him was fractured, replaced by bitter lessons and broken dreams. But beneath the fatigue, a spark remained, a fragile hope that the next generation might find a different path. The streets were quieter now, but the ghosts still whispered. The city breathed a fragile sigh of relief, but the scars of war were etched into its very bones. Tommy's story wasn't just one of blood and violence. It was a brutal legacy of survival, betrayal, and the cost of silence. As the rain began to fall softly, washing away the grime but not the memories, the Westies faded into legend, ghosts in the night who had made the Cosa Nostra bleed. Their story was a warning and a testament. In the shadows of power, no one walks away unscarred. And the price of silence was a debt paid in blood. The city's underbelly was quiet, but the echoes of violence lingered in every cracked pavement and shadowed alley. Maria stood at the edge of the harbor, the salt air sharp against her skin. "We survived," she whispered, voice heavy with loss and resolve. The Westies' legacy was a scar etched into the city's heart, a story of blood, betrayal, and resilience. The war had taken much, but it also forged something unbreakable, the will to fight, the refusal to disappear into silence. Her eyes scanned the horizon, knowing this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one written on her terms. Detective Diaz closed the last file on the Westies, with a mix of relief and lingering unease. Justice had been served, but the city's wounds were deep. "They left their mark," she said quietly, "and the streets will never forget." The case was closed, but the memory of those lives lost, those promises broken, and those betrayals endured, lingered like a ghost. She stepped into the morning light, knowing that though this chapter ended, the city's darkness was never far away. The fight for justice was endless, but so was hope. Frankie walked the streets once ruled by blood and fear, now quieter but no less haunted. "We paid the price," he muttered, voice rough with years of pain. His hands trembled as he lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like memories he couldn't escape. The war had changed everything. Friends lost, trust broken, futures stolen. But beneath the scars was a stubborn ember of hope that maybe, just maybe, the next generation could find peace where they had only known war. The Westies' story was a warning, but also a lesson in survival. The city's skyline blazed with dawn light as Tommy's name faded into legend. His story was whispered in smoky bars and passed down through generations, of a man who fought the darkest battles and bore the heaviest scars. He wasn't just a soldier, Maria told a crowd in a dimly lit room. He was a symbol of what it means to fight for family, for survival. The Westies had made the Cosa Nostra bleed, but more than that, they had carved their own brutal legacy into the heart of the city. The past was never truly gone. It lived in every breath, every shadow, every heartbeat. "There's no retirement plan for ghosts." The words echoed as Maria closed the battered family album, the faces staring back at her like silent witnesses. The Westies' story was one of blood and silence, sacrifice and survival. The city moved on, but the ghosts lingered, reminders that power was a double-edged sword, and silence carried its own price. As the night deepened and the city lights flickered, Maria vowed the story would not be forgotten. In the shadows where legends were born, the Westies' bloodline lived on, a fierce, unyielding force in the city's endless night.